In this discussion, we will be considering how leaders at schools create agency amongst their staff and colleagues, and why it's important to ensure teachers and educators at your school feel empowered and are able to take ownership of their own learning experience, both to them educating students and to their own professional development activities. We'll also consider the challenges of creating a culture of agency, how COVID has impacted teacher and staff energy, and how agency can be sustainably integrated into school life. I'm delighted to be joined by our guest today. Thanks so much for joining this call. It'd be great maybe if we could do a quick 10-15 second introduction of everyone. Perhaps if we start with Chris.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Chris Woodhams. I'm assistant principal at a school in Malaysia in Kuala Lumpur called St. Joseph's Institution International. My role is more on the academic side of the school management, and yet can't wait to share in the discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Gareth.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gareth Alcott. I'm the CEO of School Improvement Tracker, but I've spent over 20 years within education across primary, secondary and international schools. I've got a real passion for professionalisation of teaching, sort of raising the status of teaching within the sector, and hopefully we can contribute to that during the next 40 minutes.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gareth. And Lawrence.
Hello, good afternoon. So I'm Laurence. I am from BIS Hanoi. Been in education for the past 16 years, and I'm absolutely passionate about teaching and learning and how we can raise students' achievement, but also create a sense of empowerment within the school for the teachers. So that's why I'm delighted to join the conversation today.
Fantastic. Thanks all so much. Brilliant. Well, I think we should dive straight into the first question and sort of looking at defining agency. So my first question is to everyone, what do we understand by teacher agency, and why is it so important, or why does it matter in schools? Who'd like to go with that one?
Yeah. Gareth, do you want to start?
I'm very happy to start. So I think there's it's a really interesting place to start, because I think the definition is so wide. If we look at it from a teacher perspective, or we look at it from an academia perspective, but ultimately I see it as about agency as a concept, about the capacity of an individual to change the environment or aspects of their work that they're involved with. So specifically with teachers, it's about their ability to, or their capacity to have an influence on to change maybe their school, their curriculum, the approach to teaching and learning, and ultimately the impact on student outcomes.
We talked about this offline before, but there's a lot of interconnectedness between a person's self-efficacy and the level of autonomy they feel they have in their workplace, which are two key aspects I think we all agreed were part of achieving agency.
Yes, I agree. We also mentioned that agency is also being a risk taker, and then own that desire to move forward and then to develop yourself. And but it has still to say within the framework of the school context, because sometimes having too much freedom would not impact as much on the students' progress. And at the end of the day, that's what we want, because we are child-centered and we want the best for the students.
I think it's probably pertinent as well at this point just to sort of explore agency as well, because I think if you look at a lot of the research, there's it's often talked around in a generic term, but you can look at agency in terms of an agency of an individual as a professional within an organization, but also collective agency. So Priestley, Beester and Robinson, for example, talk about, their definition, I got it up because I thought it was useful for us. So teacher agency is the term that is used to refer to situations where teachers have the capacity to exercise their discretion and judgment in adapting their instruction and curriculum to meet the diverse and changing needs of their students. So that's really focused on the individual. But when you start looking at collective agency, then you can really think about, whether it be an organization within a school or a group of schools or a federation, but more globally, if you think about the collective agency of teachers globally, and if they could find their common ground and really tap into where they can see that the most change and the impact for young people, then I think there's a huge opportunity collectively to really change how students learn, what students learn, and provide that best life chance that we're looking for. I just add on as well to just extending what Chris talked about a little bit around efficacy, because also that efficacy, which is the perception of an individual and their belief that they can change it. So one is the agency about capacity to change, but efficacy about their perception and belief if they can change it. And whereas autonomy is that idea of having the freedom to do it. So the interconnectedness of the three elements that we've mentioned are absolutely key and overlap, and to ensure that each one of those plays its part in providing, you know, young people with the education they deserve.
I just also would add on, I just did a little bit of reading from Daniel Pink's book Drive, and he explores three key aspects around autonomy, which we've already talked about. His other one was mastery, so a person's sort of self-efficacy is around their belief in their competence levels, I think, and then also like having a clear purpose. I think in the education sector, we're lucky in that we all are quite united in a moral purpose, that education does give that quite clearly, and that's why a lot of people have chosen this profession. But those three components being kind of key to someone's motivation and belief in themselves as well. So there's lots of layers, but I think we're all in agreement that you know, it's a great thing to try and achieve within our schools.
I think as well that everything stems from the school culture itself, because for people to be able to take risk and then to develop their autonomy and their self-efficacy, they need to feel empowered and they need to feel trusted. So I think this can only happen if we have a school culture where we actually trust the ability of our teachers to take the lead on their professional development as well, and that we consider them as professional and willing to do the best.
Completely. I think the drawing on those threads that we've mentioned, particularly around Pink, you know, he talks about intrinsic motivation. And I think that's exactly what you were talking about, because the intrinsic motivation to do the best job you can is really driven by the environment you're in, and therefore, to a large extent, that's driven by the leadership and culture within an organisation. I think it was Douglas. And I'm looking at my notes because I did a bit of reading too, so it's not, I don't know, but there's the theory of X and theory of Y, which is it was Douglas McGregor, and he looked at the idea that you have these two sort of approaches or philosophies really, and the X being individuals who are perceived to be lazy and not fond of the job, and actually an authoritative sort of environment can sort of drive those forward. But the why, they talked about those employers that are ambitious, self-motivated, and given the right environment and psychological safety, they are risk takers. They can have agency and that efficacy to really impact what they're doing. So I think that within that risk taking, you've got to have all three. So you've got to have efficacy, you've got to have agency, but you've also got to have a bit of autonomy, because unless you've got that within a culture, you're never going to get it right. I just drop in there Fearless Organizations by Amy Edmondson, who it's a phenomenal book, and I would recommend any reader, if they haven't read it, to read that, because it's about creating an environment where people do feel safe to challenge, do feel safe to take risks, and that really creates this perception within an individual professional to really push forward and change what they're doing to make it better for young people. So that's, I think, definitely worth a read.
Fantastic. And sort of considering all these facets of agency that we just touched on, looking at practical strategies that each of you have implemented in your own school and your own school environments, what strategies exist in your schools to develop teacher collective agency, and do you have some kind of a model or framework for creating agency within your organizations? Florence, I see you nodding your head there.
Yes, because it is something like when we talked about it last time we met, it's something that we have worked, we've done a lot of significant work on this, because after COVID, we had to reframe, and then we had to bring the joy back, the joy for teaching, because as I've said earlier, teachers have done a phenomenal amount of work during COVID, but VSC is not what teaching is like, or what we've done, actually, we have decided to all together collaboratively, we wanted to have a common understanding of what effective CPD was. So we've discussed, and we came with our own definition of what we felt an effective CPD should look like in our context. And then what we've done as well, we've surveyed teachers' strengths and areas of development, and then we've discussed like the kind of framework we wanted to implement. But what was very important was not only to have a shared understanding of what CPD, effective professional development, was like, but it's also what the outcome we wanted. And we needed to be intentional about the outcome. And the desired outcomes were actually defined by our vision and mission statements. And we wanted to circle all of this together to create actually common ground, and then that momentum for our own professional development.
I think a strategy we have with our professional development, which we established quite nicely before COVID and really tried hard to get back to, with difficulties, to be honest with you. So we've got professional learning communities as a key kind of like part of our CPD program. And just in terms of agency, they're self-chosen PLCs, so staff can choose from a wide variety. Staff can opt to lead a PLC, so they've got a lot of autonomy there in what interests them. And actually, importantly, they're not so outcome based. So, a lot of staff, I think, feeling when they enter this program of PLCs that there's got to be a product at the end of it. But actually, that's not the case. It's just a professional learning opportunity. And yeah, just that's a real good vehicle for us to instill agency in the staff around a particular area of interest.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I when I was in school, I did lead PD, and one of the things I set up was something called Research Associates, and Research Associates was volunteers from the school that wanted to look at the academic research around particular areas, and we asked them to consider the time that the school's strategic objectives and priorities, and try to unpick the research and where we saw the most impact for young people. So at the time, it was that they did choose pupil premium, which was an area for underserved young people, and we engaged the University of Oxford, and that was led by one of their professors, and they worked with 6 individuals that came together. The university professor provided a range of research articles that then were read by the individuals. They came together, they unpicked some of it was like a very small meta-analysis of some of the work that they did, drew in sort of ways that to develop agency and to particularly to support pupil premium students. And then they came up with suggestions about how the research would fit into our school, and then that was presented back to the SLTs and also the governing body, and that was a really powerful way. And as a result of that, what happened is we did ultimately appoint a pupil premium lead. So we appointed somebody that was an associate member of the SLT, because that's the leadership bit that we've talked about. You've got to. There's no point in having tokenism with these things. You've got to actually act on them as leaders. So we appointed someone. They were part of the SLT, and then the pupil premium research that had been contextualized for our school cut across all of the departments, and the SLT were all in buying in. So if you look at Cotter's model of change, you know, we did get a champion, then we implemented it, we grew it, and then we sustained it, and it had a huge impact for the young people. So that was just one example that I thought of.
Fantastic. And sort of looking at perhaps some of the challenges that you've touched on, or implemented agency in your schools, when trying to create agency amongst your staff and team. Perhaps what have those challenges been, and perhaps how have you overcome those? Who'd like to go for that? Go for that one, Chris. Do you want to go for?
Yeah, I don't. I line manage a lot of middle leaders in the subject leaders in our school. Sort of overseeing curriculum is one of my roles, and that's a great opportunity for those members of staff to achieve agency, to have self-belief, and to enact change. We have a high turnover of staff in international schools, and while that's a great opportunity with new staff coming in, enthusiasm's high, there can be a kind of balance between a level of confidence that person brings, whether that's a high level of confidence or a low one. So that's one sort of aspect, and then balancing that with competence as well. So a sort of staff members' awareness about the organisational awareness of the school. So that's a bit of a challenge in kind of like getting that balance right between a person's sort of view of themselves or confidence in trying new things and implementing new ideas, and the competence, particularly within the context of a new school or a school they haven't been at very long. So me wanting to empower staff, but also trying to align those staff with basically organisational awareness, but also our key school improvement goals. So that kind of alignment for me is a real challenge.
Just sort of sitting on that a sec. Have there been things that you've tried to sort of bring those closer together, those alignments, or Yeah,
I mean, I think I really like giving over autonomy to staff, and I'm not brilliant at it, but I do like delegating. So yeah, kind of we have a subject audit that is part of our subject leadership responsibility. So that happens at the start of the year, every year, in terms of sort of subject review. And I give over a lot of autonomy around that. I'm not directing that too much, although I do obviously have my own ideas. But kind of empowering them to have a good look at the subject and giving a kind of structure around which to look at a subject and to review it, and then them developing their own action plan. We have a meeting to kind of finalise the action plan, but really I've tried to hand over the creation of that to those members of staff. But yeah, some ideas need more kind of like tempering than others. But I think it is an effective way of empowering staff and just being ready to let go a little bit. And a friend of mine said, let all the horses run, basically, which is a nice phrase. Mistakes can happen, and creating that environment where if there is a mistake, it's a learning opportunity. So that's the kind of culture that I'm trying to sort of create. But yeah, balancing out that kind of self-awareness about particularly their organisational awareness, particularly if they're new to the school. That's a bit of a challenge.
Fantastic, Lawrence. What about yourself with regards to challenges you've found?
Yeah, I mean, I am in a similar position as to Chris. I'm leading subject leaders as well, and especially this year, where I oversee all of the core subjects in primary. And we had quite a few new middle leaders who were just brand new to the role, and yes, my first move would be to empower and to trust people. Just, okay, you've applied, you've been chosen because we believe in your ability, so just go for it. However, I have found that for some of the people I've been working with, the fear of failure was a massive thing. They didn't want to disappoint. They really wanted to go above and beyond. But, you just know what you know, and you do the best you can until you know better. And I've found that this could be actually a barrier to their development, because they don't want to say. And it takes a long time to build a climate of trust and a safe place where actually, and I am there now with most of them, and that has changed the dynamic of everything. And I can see them moving forward now with the confidence, because we're not scared of coming back and say, well, actually, that didn't work. It's okay, it didn't work, so what's the next step? What are we supposed to do? But if we don't have those conditions to start with, and if as senior leaders we are not aware that no matter where they are in their career, if they start with somebody new, we need to make that mental note that they need to be reassured before being pushed to just go with it. And this is where sometimes I find our role quite tricky, when we have to balance the act between mentoring and coaching. Because sometimes they would want to be mentored, but they don't want to say, because they feel like being middle leaders, no, I need to be coached, but actually, no, I need more direction, but I don't want to tell you. I don't know if it makes sense, but it's something I've experienced this year, and that has made me reflect a lot on how I was approaching everything now.
And that makes absolute sense. And excuse me. And I suppose it's amplified, isn't it? Especially if you're moving to a new country or moving to a new continent sometimes, being in a totally new environment where the role might be relatively similar, but obviously the context with which you're doing it is entirely different, isn't it? So creating that, that culture where people reframe failure to some degree, right? I think that's what Chris was mentioning as well earlier, reframing it. Just sitting on that a sec. How have you done that and created a culture where people aren't afraid to? I mean, I actually hate the word fail, because failure is an essential step to success. So how have you done that?
Well, I've been vulnerable. I've shared my own mistakes. I've shared how I've grown. I've started as a classroom teacher, and I've been through all the steps of leadership. I've been through middle leadership and then senior leadership, and sometimes it has been a hard learning curve, a steep learning curve, and just as it's trying maybe to remember how I was before and how I didn't want to disappoint the people who had faith in me in the very first place. And sometimes, it's challenging yourself as well. And I think that's how I've been able to reframe the discussion and then the relationship. It's just opening up. And by showing that, that's, and it still happens, so don't worry. There's something we say in our school, and it has become kind of a joke now because everybody uses it. But actually, I believe in this very much. Like, I think we are work in progress, and we're not a finished product, and will never be, because we are educators, and we're here to learn, and it happens every day.
I think to add to that, Lawrence, I totally echo that. I've come through a similar pathway, and that gives an automatic layer of empathy with the middle leaders. Having been there, done that, experienced the challenges yourself. That empathy is key as well, to kind of empowering others. A phrase that's kind of been bandied about is servant leadership. So that's something I'm striving towards now, and really trying to come from a standpoint of what I can do for others. That's also early stages of that for me in my own personal development, but that's something I'm striving towards, and I think that will really help that sense of agency amongst the staff.
I think that's great. It sounds like there's two brilliant skills to work in. Starting with Lawrence, I think that authenticity of leadership is absolutely essential, because if you're part of a leadership trying to develop a culture of psychological safety, professionals and teachers can very easily spot when somebody's not being authentic. And so having having the strength to be vulnerable, I think, often comes with experience. And you talked about your journey, and you reflecting back to when you were perhaps an inexperienced leader. And it's really hard when an inexperienced leader, when you don't really know a lot about leadership and management, to be vulnerable, because you do make a lot of mistakes and you're learning it as you go. So I think that for me, I think is really key. That if you're in a school where you have young leaders and you're trying to grow them to be great leaders, only through being authentic that you can allow them to say, I'm not really sure about this, or can you help me, or has somebody got experience of this? Because schools are a wealth of knowledge. You've got hundreds of years experience around you, but it's only if you tap into that it can be really powerful. Again, Chris, your point about empathy, and if I can just stretch that a bit, because I think that empathy is great. However, I think that the next empathy, the idea of sharing feelings, but I think that the next step for that is about compassion, where actually you act upon it. So empathy is really important, because you want to be empathetic towards your professionals who are trying to do this. But compassion, that next step is like, okay, and you mentioned it, like, what can I do? That servant leadership, because that is the jump between saying, yes, I understand you've got a problem, and I'm empathetic, but I can do this for you. What can I do to support you? And that is how you create psychological safety. It's one aspect of how you can create it, which I think is essential. If I can I just go back to your original question, Max, because I think nobody's mentioned. So the barriers, you said, what are the barriers to agency? The biggest barrier is time. I've never where if you don't give time for any priority, it's not going to work. And when I say time, I'm not saying, this is our priority, therefore, okay, all the middle leaders, you need to do this. Of course, they'll sit in the meeting and they'll nod and say, yes, I'll do that. And then they'll go away and as they're walking out, they'll say, I'm not sure when I'm going to do that, because I've already got 15 things on my list. So when I talk about time, it's about creating time, not just giving somebody a priority. And how do you do that? Well, a really simple thing that we've used is stop, start, keep. Okay, so it's if you're going to have a priority and you're going to action people to do something, what are you going to ask them not to do? Because they're already working at full tilt. They can't create another 2 hours in their working day. So what are you going to ask them not to do? Or where are you going to shift some of their responsibility? And perhaps it's an opportunity for someone in their team to pick up an area of responsibility. But that's really key, because we know at the moment, post-COVID, absolutely central is staff wellbeing, and just plonking something else and saying, yeah, we're going to give you teacher agency, let's do a project on it now, go and work on this. Like, oh, okay, well, I'll try. Time is one. I think there's something around structure and about support as well, because without having structure to develop, whether it be CPD or whether it be any area, unless you've got some framework to follow and support with experience to understand some of the pitfalls of that, I think you could end up with the blind leading the blind. And I've done that. I've done that as a leader, tried to do something, but just ended up not really understanding and not really realizing that I was just walking around in the dark. So, and there's some simple models. So, for teacher agency, look at Hattie. Hattie's got some visible learning, draws on huge amounts of data, metadata, to say, we've looked at all the research. These are the things that have the biggest impact. Like collective teacher efficacy, for example, I think it's 2017 was as an effect size of 1.57. It's massive, it's huge. But you can tap into that. You've still got to contextualize it, but it allows you to draw on some of that, the research that's been done. You can look and then contextualize it. There's also the EF, Education Endowment Foundation, which has a brilliant model of school improvement, which is almost a framework. So it's like Cotter or McKinsey or something like that will guide you, and it's sort of like best practice. And it's not perfect, because as Laurent said, it's all work in progress. So I think having some level of a framework when you are trying to create change is really important. I'll stop, otherwise I'll keep going. Time,
That actually leads us really nicely onto our sort of penultimate question here, looking at those conditions that need to be in place. Are there any other aspects that everyone's touched on that do need to be in place, those sort of conditions for a school to effectively implement these strategies around agency? Chris, do you want to?
I don't know if it's a condition, but I thought about this question and I just went straight back to recruitment really, and really getting the right people on the bus from the first place to contribute and to be a part of, the culture that you want or that's developing. And like really, I'm involved in recruitment at the moment as well. I think a lot of international school teachers are. But really probing motivation, really probing kind of character and attitudes in your interview process, and unpicking that, and just being really transparent as an interviewer about the ethos, and just being open and honest about whether there's that fit. And I think when there is that fit, when you feel it in interviews, and if you get that right from the get-go and you make that connection through clever interviewing, through probing questions and well-planned questions, then you're sort of 3/4 of the way there, to be honest with you. Once because if they arrive aligned and believing in what you believe in as a school, then it just makes the journey so much easier. So yeah, that in terms of creating the right conditions, that for me is a real key moment. And I think also just within that, just having very clear articulation of the school vision and purpose, and making sure that transcends right down from the top, and there's a golden thread coming right through that is tangible, it's honest, that people can really kind of identify. And if that is really clear in people's minds and really just part of the spoken, the hidden curriculum, everything it's there, it's present, then that's the conditions in which people are going to feel comfortable, they're going to feel aligned, and they're going to be able to achieve things for themselves, for their own professional development, and things for the children and things for the school. That sounds a bit woolly, but that's I do believe that.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Laurence, what about yourself?
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of the things that Chris is saying, but I think it starts with the why. I'm going to quote Simon Sinek here. It's just, I think, like Gareth mentioned earlier, intrinsic motivation is the number one. And we all know as educators that intrinsic motivation is the hardest one to create, to establish. I think we can attract the right people by explaining why we are doing this. And the why in our schools is through the guiding statements and the core values we have. And like Chris was saying, it's identifying those people who actually believe in our core values and in our guiding statements, because if we are aligned in what we want to achieve, then we will be motivated together. I also believe in collaboration, and I believe that it takes a village, and it doesn't only takes a village to raise children, but it also takes a village for us to achieve something, because we're in this together and we learn from each other every day. We are our first, for me, it's our first port of call, it's easy resource. And like Gareth said earlier, like how many years of experience do we have all together? And sometimes that's underestimated. But I think also when Gareth mentioned time, I kind of disagree with this, because I believe that, yes, time is something that people say, but what about priority? What about taking ownership and then have your own priorities set up? Because if you want to lose weight and you're motivated to do it, you're going to find the time to exercise. And we all have the same 24 hours in a day, but the way we are going to organize those 24 hours is going to align with our own priorities. And I know it is something that we've found, like with our middle leaders, we have developed like a bespoke program to support those new middle leaders. And we've done like a formative kind of assessment with them. It's like, what are the areas you think you will need the most support? And priority was one of them. How do you prioritize? And we delved on that, and we taught them to use matrix. And we support them, and we've also done an exercise when everybody is mapping the year ahead to identify the pits, like the time in the year where the calendar is the busiest, and then that also it matches with you not feeling at your best because it's the end of term, tired, or it's a time of the year where you already are aware you don't like. I know when it comes near my birthday, I'm not in the best mood ever because years are passing by and I can't cope with it. But it's like, it's that self-awareness, I think, that's also important with the setting the conditions. So it's providing the tools as well and the strategies for people to be able to delve in their own personalities and strengths and weaknesses at the same time.
Right. I mean, for me, I think one of the talk about what conditions, I think we've mentioned some already. So I think there's culture, there's psychological safety, there's leadership and the people. I think the golden circle, the cynic stuff, amazing. If people want black box thinking, for example, Radical Candor by Kim Scott is also a brilliant read. I think that if we think about the conditions, though, there's so much. Again, there's lots of people have written about this. If you look at Robinson about culture and about there's masses of stuff out there. I mean, my starting point and go-to people are always Hargreaves and Fuller, because I think the work they've done is outstanding. I think they've not only have they done the research, they've then applied it to schools, put it in context, piloted it, and seen the impact of it. So Hargreaves and O'Connor's collaborative professionalism, for example, is phenomenal. The 10 tenets, it's out there, it exists. You have to contextualize it for your school, your trust, your region, your network. But the 10 tenets, they're fantastic. Collective autonomy, collective efficacy, collaborative inquiry, collective responsibility and collective innovation, mutual dialogue, joint work, common meaning and purpose. I mean, that is really key. So what in an environment, in a school, you've got to have a common language, and people have got to understand that language, have the same meaning from that language, because perception and misunderstanding is so easy to do. And think big picture. That's the 10th tenet that Hargreaves talks about. Does everybody understand what you're trying to achieve? Does everybody understand the journey? So and a lot of this then returns back to leadership and about ensuring that strategically that the leadership understand what they are trying to achieve, which is where Lauren started, the why. If we don't understand why we're doing something and how we're going to get there, it's all about this sort of strategic thinking and effective leadership. So I think that those for me are the sort of great aspects of great organizations, and using the experience and wealth of and rich knowledge that's out there can massively impact the rate of change, the outcomes that you do. But we have Lawrence, I still think that time is key, because you have to, so as a leader, you have to allocate, and it is about priorities. So I completely agree, but you have to prioritize and find time as a senior leader to think strategically, because with all schools, the danger is, as a senior leader, I spent the first 6 months of my life just dealing with behavioral issues. I never even thought about strategy, but then we reflected and we found and prioritized that time to ensure that we did understand the bigger picture. We understood how we're trying to do it. We really drilled down into what we were trying to achieve, how we were going to do it, how we were going to share it, have a common strategy for our internal and external key stakeholders. All of these things, it sits there, but it's often the bit that's forgotten, I think. Not in all organizations, but often where I talk to senior leaders who are struggling, sometimes because they haven't stepped away from that operational, craziness that is schools.
I think in being able to step away effectively as well and have that big picture view, the importance of kind of networking and school partnership, which is has been very challenging in COVID, particularly where I'm working in Malaysia, where literally we couldn't connect with the schools. But that's really coming back on the scene now. We're part of Obasir and AIMS, and there's lots of different international networks, ISN of course. But yeah, connecting with your wider community, the wider educational world, and being open and receptive to new ideas, and just being aware of the horizon. I think that's really important as a leader, and you bringing that back into your school, and then also signposting people to those other external opportunities. Where if the leaders are engaged out there and making things happen, then our staff can be as well. And I think making those connections across schools can really open people's minds and really give them more motivation and give them more ideas about what they might want to achieve in their own school or for themselves. I think just touching on something that was kind of mentioned by a few people, time. I'm not really answering the question here, but for me, like the concept of slow change is really important, and staff and leaders being aware of change takes time. And you said this in different ways already, and over the school year, there's a cycle of assessment, there's a cycle of the curriculum. And if you're going to make a change, you need to give it a full run to see if it works. So kind of like in terms of middle leadership management, trying to get staff to understand that these things take time and there could be errors along the way. And as a leader, being open and comfortable with that, I think is also a real key part of the conditions that need to be in place. And yeah, just that when I've achieved change in schools, it's been over a long period of time, and I've gained a lot of satisfaction because I've been there to see it. But international schools, there is turnover, and they're not always around to see the benefits of their labour, the things that probably worked really hard on and then left the next year, hopefully they're still in place and they might not have seen the benefits of their hard work. So yeah, just for staff to understand that things take a long time to change.
I mean, that leads me perfectly on to the final question, actually. How can that agency be sustainably implemented in schools? So creating agency, a culture of agency or collective agency amongst staff, team members, how can it be sustainably implemented? Have you sort of seen that life cycle to some extent now, and what does that look like for you?
This was the one I struggled with, to be honest with you. This was the one I couldn't answer, give the answer, to be honest with you. COVID has impacted in terms of the damage that's sort of done to school culture. So getting back the culture where staff agency is high, that's where our school is at the moment. But in terms of maintaining it, I can't speak intelligently of being in a school that we've achieved that. Mainly, and that's a global thing probably. So yeah, I haven't really got an answer, but continuity is key, and succession planning for key positions, being really kind of strategic about that, Gareth, and like really forward thinking about, okay, well, how reliant are we on this one member of staff? Are we thinking intelligently about the capabilities and the everything that kind of hangs with that individual, and planning forward to make sure it's not lost, basically. So yeah, two things for me is that continuity and really kind of strategic succession planning to enable that would be two things that basically will maintain staff agency.
Laurence, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think we're in the same position as well, and from the different conversations I've had with different people from other schools, like we are all more or less, like I said the first time we met, back to basic, and then actually it's a fantastic opportunity because we can reframe, but what needs to be done, it's like what we all agreed on, that it's have a common and shared understanding of what we want to achieve, and this is what needs to be done, and that needs to be done collaboratively. because that's how we are going to get the buy-in. And that's where I think we need to start. And now, yes, there are recipes, build or develop the culture of trust, provide time, professional opportunities. I think also celebrate success is important, and every single steps, because it's going to take time. It's a lengthy process, and there will be setbacks. I think consistency is key as well, and keep that drive, even like when we don't feel like we are going to. It's being patient with ourselves, because I sometimes believe that we want to run before we can actually walk, and it's like building something. We need solid foundations, and for this, it's all together. That's what I believe in, and that's where we need to start.
Fantastic. Any other thoughts on that, Gareth? I can see.
Yeah, just some final thoughts, really. I think Chris and Lawrence have covered some great ground there. I think it's just hard. Ultimately, it's not easy. So it's really easy for us to sit here for 40 minutes and saying, "Oh, do this, this, and this," but fundamentally, it's teaching. Fundamentally, teaching is an incredibly challenging profession. That's not to say that it's more difficult than anything else. It's just incredibly challenging, and therefore leading and managing the people that have got an incredibly tough professional role is equally as challenging. So I think understanding that and accepting it and recognizing that, I think, is the first thing, and being aware of it. So because then you can drive all the psychological safety and the rest of it. So I think that's the first thing I would say. The other thing is, and perhaps going back to, it's touching on a little bit what Chris talked about, but I'd go back to just making sure you've got a really good process for these things, because unless you've got a model, what you end up doing is being very reactive rather than strategic. So, have you got a strategic plan? Have you got a process for that? And there's loads of really effective change management that include sustainable change. So I think that for me is, when I was talking to, working with CEOs or head teachers, have you got, do you understand your strategic aims? Can you give me the elevated pitch of your school, in effect? Basically tell me in 30 seconds what you're trying to achieve. Because if you can't, you don't really understand what you're trying to do. So get that, and then have a process. And there's loads of change models. There's Lewin, McKinsey, Cotter. They're all good, and they're all effective, and they'll all provide sustainable change if you follow a process. And I think that then there's that iterative change that provides, organizational effectiveness. And to sustain change, you have to provide support, challenge. You've got to have these. So Chris talked about recruitment, and I think absolutely. But have you got a strategic workforce plan? I worked in so many schools where January came around in the UK, and it's like, oh, somebody's handed the notice in, what we're going to do? It's like, we'll stick an advert in the TS. It's like, well, we've had this cycle every year. Surely we can think of something a bit more strategic. So I think that having a strategic plan, a workforce plan, a workforce design plan, having some approach to effective talent management, which includes the succession planning and the talent and the sort of professional learning, I think is key. And I think that provided you've got good understanding of how strategy works from an organizational point of view, I think sustainable change is achievable.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gareth. Any other final thoughts before we wrap up? All right, great stuff. Well, thank you so much, guys, for joining this conversation. It's obviously such a vast topic, but I think we touched on some really, really interesting points there. And yeah, maybe look forward to doing a part two session, seeing how you're all getting on. And yeah, thank you again so much for your time.